Hey everybody, happy Monday. This is Meredith Miller with Inner Integration here answering your questions about self-healing after narcissistic abuse. Remember, please, the link is below the video if you would like to leave a question for one of these upcoming sessions. So I'm going to answer this question. This person says, I'm 59 years old and have always carried around a constant sense of shame and anxiety, but I didn't used to know why. My two siblings went no contact with our mother a few years ago, and I have very little contact with either of them. In spite of the terrible feelings I have about my mother, I feel deeply sorry for her. So I continue to communicate with her and occasionally visit her, most of the time in a gray rock state. But on a bad day, I resent and loathe her, and it just sometimes seethes inside me. Even on a good day, I feel anxious about her. It's like my little girl inside totally loves and remembers good times when she seemed like a loving human being. But now as an adult, I realize I don't like her at all. What kills me is that I am the mother of 3 kids myself, and I can't even begin to imagine the heartbreak if one of them went no contact with me. I'm all she has left, and going no contact just doesn't seem like a black and white decision to me. In fact, in my case, it seems like a cruel thing to do. Also, even if I did go no contact, I would continue to feel tormented mentally and emotionally. Just to let you know, I am in therapy and on medication for depression. I guess I would just like to ask you to talk about making such a decision when I know I would feel terrible about myself. I just can't seem to find my way out of her grip on my soul. I just signed up for your Sana recovery course, but if you could speak a little about what I'm describing, I would really appreciate it. So yeah, I think you're not alone here. There's a lot of us who went through very similar, what do I do about it, questions. And it's a hard decision. I think the decisions about the narcissists, sociopaths, etc. in families, these are the cases when there's just such a heavy, crushing sense of guilt that it feels like it could suffocate your heart, quite literally. And, there are some cases when it's just so dangerous to the adult kid, right? You're 59, however old the person is, the adult kid and their kids, the grandkids of the abuser. There are cases when it's so dangerous to them both that, minimal contact just doesn't work, that a person decides themselves to go no contact because they already recognize that, the narcissistic grandparent is already involving the grandchildren in the whole golden child and scapegoat fantasy. And that's already passing the lineage of abuse down. And even though you're in the middle and you recognize it's happening and you don't want that to continue, and you've changed, you've changed your codependency patterns, you're working on healing those patterns so that you don't pass on that lineage to your kids, because you can pass it on as a codependent, because what you're passing on is the personality characteristics that set a person up for abuse. Then eventually they attract abusive people, much like their grandparent or your parent. So you always want to be cautious. If you start to see that sort of thing, you might need to draw the line. I know a lot of cases where people have done that. Then there are other cases where minimal contact can work. A mitigated form of contact, just like you said, the gray rock kind of contact. Sometimes we call that minimal contact or mitigated contact, meaning you're very cautious about the kinds of contact that you have with them, and you're very cautious about what you're sharing, what you're allowing them in on, and what you're not, where the boundaries are. And these kinds of situations are major lessons in boundaries, because they will always push and push those boundaries. And, this decision is ultimately one that only you can make. I can't tell you what's right for you, with your family. And ideally, when dealing with a manipulator, whomever they are, whether they're a narcissist, a psychopath, a sociopath, a borderline, or just some passive aggressive jerk, dealing with someone like that can be so trying on your sanity and your health, like your physical health as well, not just your psychological health, but eventually it becomes physical physical health problems that you'll develop. Look at what Dr. Gabor Mate was talking about in his video, when the body says no, right? When your body begins to take on the stress of the overwhelm that's in your mind. And sometimes the easiest thing to do, the ideal situation, is just to completely go no contact. That's so much easier when the person isn't your family. When it's a lover you had, someone you dated, a relationship you were in, a marriage you were in, where you didn't have kids, right? For example, or, a boss that you had, or a coworker, or a friend, or a neighbor. And then there are situations where you can't be entirely no contact. And that could be the situation of people co-parenting with an abusive person. That's a lifelong lesson in boundaries, because the court mandates contact. You're sharing children, you're sharing custody, there's details to work out, money, and other things that you just always going to have that contact with that person. So you have to master your boundaries, and you have to master the gray rock technique so that you can externalize that abuse and not internalize it, not take it on, not allow that to direct and control your life. It could be a situation of someone at work. It's a boss or a coworker. They would love to go no contact, but they can't because they're stuck in that job for a period of time until they can get a new job. And so they figure out the minimum contact. And it could be in these family situations where maybe the guilt is just so crushing that you can't bring yourself to go no contact. Or maybe this may not be your situation, but in other situations, it could be that the other parent, who is the codependent, and not always, right? Because sometimes two narcissists, or a narcissist and a sociopath, and a borderline and a narcissist, or a borderline and a psychopath, or sociopath will be together. But let's say that it's a situation where there's one narcissistic parent, whomever they are on that cluster B spectrum, and then there's the codependent parent. And they're not divorced, like they're together and they're a package deal, because the codependent parent is so severely codependent that they're defending the abuser, or they're not standing up against the abuser. So in order to have any contact in a relationship with that codependent parent, it's a package deal. You have to have then minimal contact with the abusive parent. You don't have to, right? These might be choices that you make. When I say have to, I'm speaking maybe of my own situation where I still want to have a relationship with my father, and they're a package deal. So now I have mitigated contact with my mother and very clear boundaries. And yes, just like you said, she will push the buttons. It's like at least every conversation, which is about every other month now, but it doesn't fail. There's always a zinger. Always, at least one thing that she does in every conversation. She'll usually wait till the very end too. And if you can get to the point where you can depersonalize that and put that outside yourself and label that for what it is, guilt tripping, minimization, blame shifting, rationalization, whatever the abuse tactic is. And if you aren't familiar with those covert aggression tactics, I recommend Dr. George Simon's book, In Sheep's Clothing. He outlines every one of them, and it's like at least a paragraph or more, a description of what that is. And you'll look at that maybe like I did, and wow, that's abuse. Oh my God, no wonder that always felt so shitty. And I couldn't understand that that was abuse. That was emotional abuse, like the guilt tripping. You might have just written it off because your family is Italian Catholic, like half of my family, right? Oh, that's just how Italian Catholics are. It's the guilt tripping. Just deal with it. That's just how it is. But no, that's actually a form of covert aggression. Once you label it what it is, it's so much easier to take a step back from that and to not take it personally, right? Because even though they're making it personal, they're making it about you, you don't have to take it personally. You can put that outside yourself, and you can work on your own response to that and recognize that that person is going to keep touching those buttons. And so it's up to us to do the work to get rid of those buttons. It doesn't mean we have to keep those people in our life just to prove that, we've mastered our buttons and we're not going to let anybody push our buttons. There will always be someone who shows up in your life. If you don't work it out with your mom and you go no contact with her, somebody else will show up in your life with the same patterns, very, very similar, and they'll touch those same buttons because inevitably that's what it's about, right? We have to face it, to deal with it. And, I think it's normal to feel sorry for someone. You talked about how you feel sorry for her. I think it's normal to feel sorry for someone who made poor life choices. When you can look at that and recognize, wow, she made some really poor life choices. She's continuing to make poor life choices. And even when those choices were about abuse, right? Someone taught her that. Where did she learn that? One of her parents, quite likely. Someone taught her that. And when we place blame, right? And this is why we focus on not placing blame. Like at one level, yeah, she's at fault. She's to blame for what happened. But if you stay stuck there, then you'll always stay stuck in the victimhood. And on a bigger picture, if you look back and recognize someone taught her that, like your mom didn't invent the game. My mom didn't invent that game. Someone taught them. This is a transgenerational pattern that continues forever until someone stands up and says, it ends with me. I'm breaking the silence. I'm calling this out. I'm risking attack from the family, ostracization from the family, more abuse from the family, and all of this because I'm done with that. Every one of us who is standing up has the bravery to face that. These are really challenging things to stand up against because you're talking about a whole family who has been excusing that and enabling that abuse for generations. And it doesn't excuse what they did. It doesn't make it okay that their parent did it and their parent did it and their parent, and it just got passed down. It doesn't mean it's okay. Having been abused is never an excuse to abuse someone else. Often I'll hear borderlines use this as their excuse for their behavior as adults, recognizing the few that actually recognize that they have abused others, and then they'll justify it by saying it's because they were the ones who were abused. You know what, honey, we all have been abused. Okay, everyone listening to this channel has been abused. Even the narcissist, the sociopath, the borderline, the psychopath, the histrionic, pretty much guaranteed that they have been abused. I think it's only a very, very small percentage of them that are entirely genetically based, that there was nothing happening in those familial dysfunctional dynamics, right? I believe much more in the environment. Yes, there's the biology and there's the genetics, but why are those genetics expressed and why are sometimes they not expressed? Look at epigenetics, which is a new field in science, which is talking about that. Yeah, we might all carry the psychopath gene if we were born into a family where this gene runs down the line, but it doesn't mean that we become that. We might become the codependents, right? We don't activate that gene for whatever reason in the environment. Maybe there was a loving grandparent. Maybe there was some other parent, or some other parent, maybe, or some other person in the child's life who was able to show them unconditional love and they were able to form this emotional attachment with. So they didn't end up becoming on the cluster B spectrum of things. But no matter where you find yourself, codependency, cluster B, whatever, you're an adult now, right? We're all adults now, and we can't keep blaming the generations before, and we can't keep blaming everybody else. It's important to recognize abuse when it's there and to not tolerate that abuse when you see it. But it's also important to empower ourselves and recognize that this is a transgenerational pattern. And the only way it stops is when we stop it. We don't allow that to continue within ourselves and within the next generations to come. So great job to you with that gray rock communication, by the way, because that's really hard. It's really, really hard to master that. I think it's actually easier to go no contact than to maintain the gray rock. But I also totally understand why that's where you're at, because I'm in a similar situation. And, you mentioned the loathing the resentments that you have towards your mom. What does that mean? That means forgiveness work is needed. You might not be there yet. You might not be there today, and that's okay. Have patience with yourself. You can't force yourself to forgive somebody. You will forgive somebody when you're ready. And it's important to remember and to start putting the idea in your head, because sometimes we get confused around forgiveness and abuse, and we think that forgiveness means saying that it was okay, and it's not. Forgiveness is not saying that it was okay. Forgiveness is not condoning that behavior. And sometimes we're afraid that if we forgive, then it means we have to keep that person in our life. And it doesn't mean that either. You don't have to keep that person in your life. You can forgive them without ever having a dialogue with them. They could be dead and you can forgive them, because this is about you. Forgiveness is about you, not them. It doesn't do anything good for them. Okay, forgiveness is for your benefit so that you can free yourself and liberate yourself from those heavy feelings of resentment, regret, bitterness, loathing. You know, you mentioned you just started the Sun series, and that's awesome. I think forgiveness is week number 11, and I purposely put it towards the end, and I explained why in the series, because this is not something that we do in the very early stages of recovery. We just can't get there. We can't get into that mental space because we're still in the cognitive dissonance, trying to work out, what is this? What was going on? Is this really abuse? But it was this and it was that, and what is it really? We're still trying to work a lot of things out, which is why the forgiveness comes later. It comes later, and it comes at a different time for everyone. There might be some people that can forgive a lot sooner. It might also be part of their abuse training. They might have been taught to forgive and to keep accepting that person in their life, to keep allowing them to hurt them and then to forgive them again. So you might have been taught, somebody listening to this might have been taught that pattern. Recognize that's a dysfunctional pattern of forgiveness, because forgiveness doesn't mean you're going to keep turning the cheek and you're just going to keep allowing them, to hit you upside the head. That's not what forgiveness is. Okay, forgiveness is to set yourself free, to release those heavy feelings. It's like sending back to that person all of those heavy feelings that they have transferred to you through their projection, through their abuse, which caused you to take on those heavy feelings. Forgiveness is like the lubrication that sets that stuff free, and you are exactly correct that even if you go no contact, and this message was a little longer, I abbreviated it. She had mentioned even if the mom died, that it would probably be the same. That's so true, and it's great that you recognize that your mother's physical presence here has nothing to do with how you feel and think about that. Right? All that it means, if you go entirely no contact while she's alive or while she's dead, all that means is you won't be continually re-traumatized and triggered every time she continues the abuse, right? But even when they die, those feelings of imprisonment will still exist inside you until you set yourself free. And remember, those prison bars aren't real. They're holographic. They appear to be so real. And so we sit in the cage and we feel helpless and hopeless and feels like we can't get out. And then that learned helplessness makes us not even try. So we just sit in the corner in fetal position and we just keep accepting it. Until one day something happens, right? And we stand up and we have this new sense of courage and we just take a run for it. And we realize that we just passed right through those bars. They weren't even real. It was just a hologram. It was just an image. That cage didn't really exist. We were keeping ourselves locked in that reality paradigm, which of course we didn't invent. That was taught to us, right? It's not your fault. That was taught to you, right? But it's your responsibility to stand up and get out of that prison when you're tired of being in there. I totally understand what these feelings are, that loathing that you're talking about. I used to have nightmares about my mother, where I would get to the point where I was just screaming, I hate you, like just so desperate because I was repressing those feelings in waking life. I was going on and pretending like nothing was happening and everything was okay. And I just kept accepting it and dealing with it, not really looking for answers, not recognizing who she was and what she was doing. And so all of that inside me was just building up in my subconscious. So in the dreams and the nightmares, I was working that out. I even had one dream last year in Peru where some people were coming to kill me, right? I don't know who it was, some kind of army, something was coming to kill me. And so I ran home And my mom was like, upstairs, go hide upstairs. I'm like, yeah, okay. So I went upstairs and I'm hiding, and they came to the door, and my mom goes, she's upstairs. And I just woke up going, just like shuddering, because that's literally how I felt all my life. Like, she wasn't on my side. She pretended to be. And that was very confusing. But given the opportunity, she would turn me over, you know, in a heartbeat. So if you're having that sort of, you know, nightmares and these sorts of things, flashbacks, you could be having flashbacks in your waking life. Some people experience them more in dreams and nightmares. Pay attention to those and journal them, because there's something there. And if you're like me, when you have the dream, the nightmare, you want to be like, okay, just bury it and put it away, which is what I tried to do. But then I kept having flashbacks of the nightmare while I was awake. And it was just a reminder that I needed to deal with that I needed to really face how I felt about it. So that's the inner work that you're being called to do, is to work on those feelings that you have, and to recognize that you're not going to be able to work them out with her. That's not going to happen. It's going to happen with inside you. Whether she's alive or dead, whether you have contact with her or not, this is your work. This is our work. This is the work that we all need to do inside ourselves. Otherwise, whether she's in your life or not, someone else will come along. The universe will orchestrate it, because your inner state is vibrating and resonating with that, with somebody who's going to remind you that you feel that way, somebody who's going to hurt you so you can feel more resentment and realize that you feel resentment, that you still feel resentment from the past. So this is the work that you need to do. I know that you're going to find a lot of help in that sauna series, so I'm really glad that you decided to start doing that. That's fantastic. You know, you can leave comments on each of the episodes, and other people leave comments, and you guys can connect with each other, and I try to answer those comments too. So I just want to send you a huge hug. You know, you said here, getting out of her grip on your soul. And I think a lot of us feel that soul connection, whether it's with a parent, a family member, or a partner, a lover, someone that you felt you had a soulmate connection with. So I invite you to try like a meditation or visualization where you imagine doing that. You imagine releasing her grip on your soul. However you want to envision that. You know, if you have particular religious beliefs, you could bring in religious figures. If you have particular spiritual beliefs, you could bring in those spirit guides. For example, maybe Archangel Michael is one of your spirit guides, and he has a sword, and Archangel Raphael, which is the healer, comes in with the green light of healing. You know, whomever you want to pull in, or maybe you just want to do it yourself, and you envision literally, what does it look like? What does it look like, her grip on your soul? How do you visualize that psychically? Do you see a symbol? Do you see an image of something? Okay, look at that. Breathe into that. And then ask yourself, okay, how could I release this? How could I release this grip on my soul? Because my soul is my soul, and I have a right to the sanctity of my soul. You have the right to the sovereignty of your being without someone else in there gripping your soul. So know that you have the right and you have the permission to do that. You just have to give yourself permission and create some sort of ritual where you imagine releasing that. Maybe you need to do it several times. Maybe the first time you have so much psychic resistance. And when I say psychic, I mean your mind, your energy, your emotions, right? Your soul. You might have resistance to that. There's just so many layers of programming around that. So it might take some time, but eventually you'll see. And remember that your subconscious can't tell the difference between what you're imagining and remembering and what's really happening. So the more you practice this, the more you visualize, and that's how the best way to reach the subconscious is through imagery. So the more you visualize releasing her grip on your soul, whatever it is, maybe you want to do some movement and that feels like you're releasing something. Concentrate on your breath and use your breath as you're doing this work. But create some sort of visualization, meditation ritual that you can do to practice releasing that. I'm also going to put in the video description a link to 2 books. Every one of you who's had a mother somewhere on that cluster B spectrum, it doesn't matter if she was a narcissist or whomever, On that cluster B spectrum, Mothers Who Can't Love, A Healing Guide for Daughters, the link is below, and Will I Ever Be Good Enough, Healing the Daughters of Narcissistic Mothers. I feel like these books can also help men. It's just that they're written by women talking to women, right? So I definitely feel there are gems in there that can apply to men as well. It's just that, they say, even my therapist says, typically it's worse for the daughter than the son if it's the mother that's the narcissist. That isn't always the case. My brother was the scapegoat, so it was really bad for him too. So I'm putting those links below, and I'm sending you and every one of you who are struggling with this a big hug.